all. Hope you're ready to continue with your reading today of the Twits. Let's have a look at which chapters we will be reading today. So today we are looking at the wormy spaghetti and the funny walking stick. Question before reading. So number 1, using your prediction skills and what you have read so far, what do you think might happen in this chapter? So pause me, jot it down. What do you think might happen in this chapter? Right, let's get started and see if your predictions were right. So same as always, you can pause me and read it yourself, or you can sit back and listen, or a bit of both, whatever you would like to do. The wormy spaghetti. The next day, to pay Mr. Twit back for the frog trick, Mrs. Twit sneaked out into the garden and dug up some worms. She chose big long ones and put them in a tin and carried the tin back to the house under her apron. At 1 o'clock she cooked spaghetti for lunch, and she mixed the worms in with the spaghetti, but only on her husband's plate. The worms didn't show because everything was covered with tomato sauce and sprinkled with cheese. "Hey, my spaghetti's moving," cried Mr. Twit, poking around in it with his fork. "It's a new kind," Mrs. Twit said, taking a mouthful from her own plate, which of course had no worms. "It's called squishy spaghetti. It's delicious. Eat it up while it's nice and hot." Mr. Twit started eating, twisting the long tomato-covered strings around his fork and shoveling them into his mouth. Soon there was tomato sauce all over his hairy chin. "It's not as good as the ordinary kind," he said, talking with his mouth full. "It's too squishy." "I find it very tasty," Mrs. Twit said. She was watching him from the other end of the table. It gave her great pleasure to watch him eating worms. "I find it rather bitter," Mr. Twit said. "It's got a distinctly bitter flavour, but buy the other kind next time." Mrs. Twit waited until Mr. Twit had eaten the whole plateful. Then she said, "You want to know why your spaghetti was squishy?" Mr. Twit wiped the tomato sauce from his beard with the corner of the tablecloth. "Why?" he said. "And why it had a nasty bitter taste." "Why?" he said. "Because it was worms!" cried Mrs. Twit, clapping her hands and stamping her feet on the floor and rocking with horrible laughter. The funny walking stick. To pay Mrs. Twit back for the worms in his spaghetti, Mr. Twit thought up a really clever, nasty trick. One night when the old woman was asleep, he crept out of bed and took her walking stick downstairs to his workshed. There he stuck a tiny round piece of wood, no thicker than a penny, on to the bottom of the stick. This made the stick longer, but the difference was so small, the next morning Mrs. Twit didn't notice it. The following night Mr. Twit stuck on another tiny bit of wood. Every night he crept downstairs and added an extra tiny thickness of wood to the end of the walking stick. He did it very neatly so that the extra bits looked like a part of the old stick. Gradually, but oh so gradually, Mrs. Twit's walking stick was getting longer and longer. Now, when something is growing very slowly, it is almost impossible to notice it happening. You yourself, for example, are actually growing taller every day that goes by, but you wouldn't think it, would you? It's happening so slowly you can't even notice it from one week to the next. It was the same with Mrs. Twit's walking stick. It was all so slow and gradual that she didn't notice how long it was getting, even when it was halfway up to her shoulder. "That stick's too long for you," Mr. Twit said to her one day. "Why, so it is," Mrs. Twit said, looking at the stick. "I've had a feeling there was something wrong, but I couldn't for the life of me think what it was." "There's something wrong, all right," Mr. Twit said, beginning to enjoy himself. "What can have happened?" Mrs. Twit said, staring at her old walking stick. "It must suddenly have grown longer." "Don't be a fool," Mr. Twit said. "How can a walking stick possibly grow longer? It's made of dead wood, isn't it? Dead wood can't grow." "Then what on earth has happened?" cried Mrs. Twit. "It's not the stick, it's you," said Mr. Twit, grinning horribly. "It's you that's getting shorter. I've been noticing it for some time now." "That's not true," cried Mrs. Twit. "You're shrinking, woman," said Mr. Twit. "It's not possible." "Oh, yes, it jolly well is," said Mr. Twit. "You're shrinking fast. You're shrinking dangerously fast. Why, you must have shrunk at least a foot in the last few days." "Never!" she cried. "Of course you have. Take a look at your stick, you old goat, and see how much you've shrunk in comparison. You've got the shrinks, that's what you've got. You've got the dreaded shrinks." Mrs. Twit began to feel so trembly she had to sit down. "So, were your predictions correct? Did you predict that they would play tricks on each other again, or did you predict something else? Have a look now. Do you think your prediction was a good one, or maybe could you have thought about it a little bit more? What do you think? Okay, let's go on to today's questions. So, your second question today: what did Mrs. Twit tell Mr. Twit when he saw his spaghetti moving? Number 3. Mrs. Twit put worms in the spaghetti. What else might she have hidden in it that looks similar to spaghetti? Can you think of any ideas? On page 21 and page 22, why do you think Roald Dahl uses italics so much when Mr. Twit is talking? And number 5, can you write a summary of the trick Mr. Twit played on his Mrs. Twit in the funny walking stick in your own words? Your sentence starters are there. Okay, for number 3, you've got to make a list, so you can do that with bullet points or commas. It's up to you. And pause me while you're doing it, and when you're ready to go through the answers, come back and we'll go through them together. Good luck. Hopefully we've all had a go at those questions, so let's go through the answers. So, what did Mrs. Twit tell Mr. Twit when he saw his spaghetti moving? So, Mrs. Twit told Mr. Twit that she had bought a new kind of spaghetti called squiggly spaghetti. Number 3, Mrs. Twit put worms in the spaghetti. What else might she have hidden in it that looks similar to spaghetti? Can you think of any ideas? Now, I could only think of a few. I put rats' tails, mice tails, giant slugs, centipedes, etc., that sort of thing. If you've got something you've written down that you think is a really good idea, email it me and I'll share it next week with everyone. On page 21 and 22, why do you think Roald Dahl uses italics so much when Mr. Twit is talking? Okay, so I've put that Roald Dahl uses italics so much in this passage because he's showing how Mr. Twit is talking and emphasising certain words. You might have thought differently. Again, if you want to share those with me, send me an email. That'd be great. And then finally, you had to write a summary of the trick Mr. Twit played on Mrs. Twit in the funny walking stick and put it in your own words. So these were mine. If yours is similar, great. If it's slightly different, that is fine. Mr. Twit sneaks out to his workshop in the night and adds a penny-sized piece of wood onto the bottom of Mrs. Twit's walking stick. He repeats this every night until one day Mrs. Twit notices her stick has grown almost as big as her. Mr. Twit tells her she has the shrinks and it is her that has shrunk. Okay, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this part of the story and we'll finish off tomorrow. Okay, bye. Hello, class 3 and 4. So we are continuing on from our angles topic. So yesterday we looked at comparing angles, and today we're going to take a look at ordering angles. So I would like you, first of all, and you can do it in your head, write it in your book, tell me which of these shapes contains the smallest angle. Pause me while you do it. Come back when you're ready. Okay, as you can see, I have drawn the angles in there to make it a little bit easier if you were stuck. Clearly, from this, you can see that B has in fact got the smallest angle. If we look there, it is a lot smaller. The angles over here are all obtuse. Over here, all obtuse, and that one is acute, and so is that one actually. So B is the answer. So you can do this one in your head or you can write it in your books, whatever you would prefer. But I'd like you to have a little look at these segments and I want you to put the angles in order from smallest to largest. So A, B, C, D, which is the largest and which is the smallest. So my angle drawing is very wonky there, guys. I'm sorry, but they are there to help you. And I'm hoping if you've all had a go, you can see that A is in fact the smallest, B is of course the largest, and C is smaller than D. So the answer is A, C, D, and then B. Okay, so now you need to arrange the angles from largest to smallest. Remember, guys, if you are stuck, you can always look at where a right angle would fit. Does it sit before, after? That sometimes helps, but it's whatever is best for you. Okay, hopefully you've got the answer A, D, B, and then C. So A is the largest, because if we put our right angle in, I'll show you this way of doing it. Sorry guys, it's hard on the computer. It is clearly a lot bigger there than a right angle. For this one, if we put the right angle in against that one, it's smaller there, but still bigger than a right angle. B, the right angle would be there, so it's slightly smaller, and C is clearly the smallest angle. Okay then, so for your do it today, for question 1, you need to put the angles in order, so it's similar to the one we did previously. So A, B, C, D, you're going from largest to smallest, okay? And then for question 2, you're going to put the angles within the shape in order from smallest to largest, so A, B, C, D. What is the answer there? And then question 3, true or false, angle A is larger than angle B, which is smaller than angle C. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Pause me while you have a go at those. We'll go through the answers slightly later, and I'll just go through you secure it now. Zoe is discussing angles. I have 3 angles. One is 89 degrees, one is a right angle, and the other is obtuse. I think that the obtuse angle is the smallest angle. Is Zoe correct? Explain your answer. Okay, when you've had a go at those, come back and we'll go through the answers together. Hopefully you have all had a go at your do it then. So the answers, question 1, the order was B, D, A, then C. For question 2, the answers were D, A, B, C, that's it. I don't know why I carried on talking then as if there was something else to say. Okay, and number 3, true or false, angle A is larger than angle B, which is smaller than angle C. That was in fact true. Well done if you got those. If you're looking at this thinking, I've not got this, I'm really unsure, I've gone wrong, send me an email, guys. I'm more than happy to go through that with you. Just a reminder, my email is year4@redbrookhayes.staffs.sch.uk. And then finally, if you secure it, it said Zoe is discussing angles. She says, I have 3 angles. One is 89 degrees, one is a right angle, and the other is obtuse. I think that the obtuse angle is the smallest angle. Is Zoe correct? Explain your answer. I'm hoping that we've got something along these lines. So Zoe is incorrect because an obtuse angle is greater than a right angle. A right angle is 90 degrees, so the 89 degrees is the smallest angle. Okay. Any problems with that, guys? Send me an email and I will be back with you tomorrow. Bye.
Good morning, class 3 and 4. We're on Thursday, the 4th of June, and this is your writing lesson. Okay, so before we get on to our writing part, let's have a little look here at your grammar. So we've been looking at word families this week. We've been focusing on root words, prefixes, and suffixes. What I'd like to do is see if you can find all the possible combinations of prefixes and suffixes with the root word open. So have a go at adding these prefixes and suffixes and see which ones work and which ones don't create a word. Okay, so pause it now whilst you have a go in your book. Okay, so the answers are here. So we've got unopen. So if you perhaps something is unopened, it hasn't been opened yet. Opener, something that opens something, and openly. Okay, so you might openly talk about something. Openest, openless, and auto-open are not words. Okay, so those would not have worked. Okay, so your LA today is to explore the features of a play script. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at the chapter Wormy Spaghetti, but we're going to be looking at it in a different format. Now, I want you to have a think about what kind of text it is, why it's been written like this, and what helps the reader to understand the text. Now, there's a bit of a clue in your learning objective. So pause it now whilst you write down your LO. Okay, so have a little look here. We've got at the top there, it says the twits, the list of characters, 3, which is narrator, Mr. Twit, and Mrs. Twit. Scene 7, the wormy spaghetti. Lunchtime at the Twits' dirty, grubby dinner table. Narrator. To get her revenge for the frog trick, Mrs. Twit has dug up some wriggly garden worms and put them in Mr. Twits' lunchtime spaghetti. Oh yes, she was going to enjoy this lunch. Cheery music. Mr. Twit, yelling with shock. Hey, my spaghetti's moving! Mrs. Twit, smiling mischievously. It's a new kind, dear. It's called squiggly spaghetti. It's delicious. Go on, eat it up while it's nice and hot. Takes a forkful of her own spaghetti. Mr. Twit, loudly talking with his mouth full. It's not as good as the ordinary kind. It's much too squishy. A worm falls from his fork into his filthy beard. Mrs. Twit, smiling cheerfully. I find it very tasty. Takes another mouthful happily. Mr. Twit, barking grumpily. No, I find it rather bitter, very bitter. Buy the other kind next time. Okay, so I think you've read this already in the book, but how does this look different? It's still telling the same story, but it's been presented in a different way, in a different format. So, what is the purpose of this text? What's it for? Well, this is a play script, okay? So this would be for somebody who would be performing this, perhaps on a stage or as part of a drama activity. So this is it's a type of script for people to read if they were to perform this. So you've got a list of characters up here. So you would have somebody that plays the narrator, someone that's playing Mr. Twit, and someone that's playing Mrs. Twit, okay? So those three people, those actors, would each have a copy of this script and they would follow it to act it out. So that was the next question. Who has it been written for? So this could be for when you guys are simply learning about play scripts, but also for actors that are acting it out. It would be for them to learn their lines. So when we do our sort of Christmas play at school, and we do the pantomime, people that are on stage and have things to say or have lines, they will have a script that looks just like this. Okay, so the purpose of this is to tell actors where they need to go, what they need to say and what they need to do, and it's been written for actors. So can you spot any features which help the actors to understand the script better? So have a little look. Is there anything there that the author has put in to help the actors understand the script better, or perhaps their role better? So we've got here narrator. Now, narrator is the person that tells the story. Okay, so they're not necessarily a character. The characters don't interact with them or talk to them usually, unless the writer has done it for a certain effect. Okay, here the bits that aren't in italics and that aren't bold, this is what the characters say. Now the names here aren't said out loud, they're in bold, but they just tell the actors which character is speaking when. Okay, so Mr. Twit won't say Mr. Twit, they would just simply say, hey, my spaghetti's moving. The bit that's in the brackets, that's in italics where it looks like it's slanted, these are telling the reader the action or what they're doing at the same time. Okay, so here Mr. Twit, it says that he's yelling with shock, so I know that when I say, hey, my spaghetti's moving, I have to yell that with shock. So I've got to sound like I'm really shocked, okay? And that would also direct that actor who's playing Mr. Twit to act really shocked as well as yell that out loud, okay? So Mrs. Twit here, she's smiling mischievously. So as she says all of this, she knows that she's got to be smiling and looking like she's up to something. And then at the end of it, she has to take a forkful of her own spaghetti. And then here, Mr. Twit, he doesn't read, the actor won't read this bit out, but he knows that he's got to be talking loudly with his mouth full for the next part, as he says, it's not as good as the ordinary kind, it's much too squishy. And then you'd have it so that a worm would fall from his fork into his filthy beard. Okay, so that is how that looks different to a normal book. And at the top there, of course, we've got our list of characters. And then here, it says scene 7, the wormy spaghetti, and then underneath it just tells us at what point this is happening. So it's lunchtime, and it's at the Twit's dirty, grubby dinner table. So we know that that's where Mr. and Mrs. Twit would be sat. So what I'd like you to do today is to plan your own play script for the chapter, The Funny Walking Stick. Okay, so in your book, You can draw this out yourself. You don't have to draw the pictures, but you want to draw the setting, characters. So write those 2 words and jot down where it is. And you're just planning it today, but you've got those 3 different parts there, so 3 different sections for that chapter. So what is said at that point, who says what, and what is happening. Okay, so this is just a plan for you to put into your own play script tomorrow. Okay, so have a look at those pictures. So start with your first one, what is said, what is happening, and then to your next part and the next part. Okay. Right, so good luck with that then, guys. Any problems, give me or Miss Foster an email and we can help you out. And have fun with it, guys, okay? Do what you can. Have a go. Bye.